How's that screen share, Ryan? Is that looking okay?
Yes, perfect.
Awesome. So I'm just going to be in between that deck and then in Marketing Cloud. So those are the two places. And how's that size as far as...
That's a bit blurred.
That's a bit
blurred. That's better. Some of it's a bit blurred, but people will know it, I think, because the Marketing Cloud users. Yeah, the AMPscript's pretty hard to read.
Is that too zoomed in, or is that?
Yeah, it looks like hieroglyphics. Yeah, might be I've got very bad eyesight, but yeah.
Yeah, you can't really
hello, everyone. Hope you're all well. We're just going to give it 30 more seconds, make sure we've got a full complement of people. So excited to have you all joining us. We have Tim Ziter here today from Cervelo in Boston. And he's got over 5 years experience of Marketing Cloud. I'm Ryan Hill from Secante. I'll be moderating today's session. Before we get started, got a couple of housekeeping items to cover. So firstly, we're going to record the session. It will be available on demand after the event. We'll also be following up with them via email. If you have any questions, post them in the chat. I will answer them or pass them to Tim to answer, and we can answer them in session. Please use the chat as much as you want. There's lots of fun stuff in there, emojis, GIFs. So let's get started with Tim, and we will be discussing AMPscript and hyper-personalization.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. Thanks, everybody, for joining. And before I get started, I just want to say thank you to all of our incredible sponsors. Please take the time while you're attending to stop by their areas to find out more about the amazing products that they provide. And like Ryan said, we're going to be talking about AMPscript. We're going to be going over those 5 tips and our use case. And then we're going to be right in the platform, building out 2 different use cases to utilize and showcase those tips. And then at the end, we'll do a quick recap and talk about resources. Okay, AMPscript. So as many of you may know, AMPscript is that proprietary coding language that's used in Salesforce Marketing Cloud to bring out that great personalization in all of your email communications. So when taking a look at those 5 next level tips, the first one that we always encourage is that to focus on those basics. Build that solid foundation in AMPscript so that you can add on complexity at the right pacing. So today we're going to be going over things like adding a custom code snippet AMPscript block to keep all of your AMPscript in that block, and then doing things like variabilizing your data points. Number 2 is leveraging those resources. We're going to be using the AMPscript guide a lot today. There's also Stack Exchange and Trailblazer groups. If you're working through an AMPscript issue, more often than not, there will be somebody out there in the community who's worked through that before. So definitely lean on those amazing resources that are out there. Number 3, own your code. So if you do find that great code out there in the community and you do copy it into your environment, break it down, really understand it line by line so that you can really understand what it's doing. So it's not just like a mishmash of all these different copied codes, and do things like outputting, the data in your process so that you can see the code validated. Number 4 is championing the big 3: lookups, if-thens, and for loops. We're going to go through all of those today. When you're talking a little bit more advanced AMPscript, those are the big ones. There's a ton of functions out there in AMPscript, but those are the big ones that you're going to want to focus on. And then push those limits. Once you've got that solid foundation, you can do anything with AMPscript, only if it makes sense, right? You don't want to incur too much tech debt. So in today's session, we're going to be going over a dozen of those AMPscript functions, so it should be exciting. So here's our use case. So Northern Trail Outfitters has recently launched a loyalty program, and they want to begin communicating to their members. They want to develop a personalized and engaging email stream. So our first build is just going through basic practices of personalization. And then our second build is going to be, building off of that, using some more custom personalization to output custom loyalty steps for each of those loyalty members. In our best practices personalization use case, we're going to be doing things like looking at what a personalization strings versus setting an AMPscript variable, setting up that code snippet block, some best practices, and formatting. Here's a quick overview of those functions that we're going to be using. Attribute value is the first one we're going to be using. That normalizes your data when you variabilize it. So that makes it easier for all of the functions you're going to use after that. The V function is a very basic function, just outputs those variables in your code. Empty, we'll be using an if statement, returns a value, a true value if it's not empty. And then some formatting like proper case, the initial cap, using substring and subtract to help pull out, parse different parts of your text or your data points. And then even using a tool like index of, which we'll be going through today as well. All right, so let's jump right into the platform. We're going to go into Marketing Cloud. And then first off, I just want to make sure that I've got this sized correctly so people can see from a text standpoint. Let me just increase this a little bit to see if that helps. Ryan, how's that looking? Can people see this? Is that clear as far as what I'm showing here? Because we're doing a little bit of coding today.
Yeah, you can zoom in on the Goldcast, guys. Just touching your touchpad and zooming in, you can get into that little bit there, and I've done that and it looks better. So if you need to, please zoom in and let us know if you can't see it, please.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got a basic email here set up. So this is our welcome email that we're going to be sending to our loyalty members. And we've got some basic personalization here, this %% name variable. So to understand what this is doing, we've got another tab open in Marketing Cloud, and what we've got here are a list of data extensions we're going to be using today. So this first data extension, this is our data extension that we're going to be using to send our email. So it has a list of those emails that would be sent for that loyalty program. And this is where that name field is being pulled in that we're going to be doing with this basic AMPscript using that value of just %%, the value within the data extension. So when we hit preview on this, we should see that field get populated. So here's that name field in the data extension. And see, we're seeing Kristen here populated. So there it is, your basic AMPscript using that %% syntax. So we're going to want to take this to a next level and start variabilizing your code and building that within an AMPscript code snippet block. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to navigate up to the top of this email, and we're going to go back into Content Builder. And what we're going to want to do is just create a code snippet block near the top of our email where we can capture all of our AMPscript. And to do that, we're going to open up our AMPscript block by using a %% open bracket. We're going to create a little bit of space in here, and we're going to close that bracket and %%. So now we can do all of our AMPscript coding within this block. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we want to create a variable for that greeting. Instead of using that %% name value of the data extension, we want to create a variable. So since that looked like it was a first name, let's call this variable first name. And what we're going to want to do is we want to create a variable. To use that, we're going to want to use the attribute value function. And we want to copy that field that we want to pull in, that name field. And I typically like to do is literally go right to the data extension and copy that field. We could just type in name, but sometimes that does help when your values get a little bit complicated. You'll know you're bringing over the right syntax. I also created this var statement up above, which is kind of best practices to declare your variables, and that's what that var statement does. Okay, so here's a very basic implementation of our first step, which is to take that variable of that name and variabilize it into that first name value. Again, that attribute value is going to normalize your data so it's consistent when we're going to use it down the road. So to output this variable, we're going to use our second AMPscript function, which is the V function. So we're just going to modify this right here. We're going to do an equal sign. We're going to do the V function, and then we're going to put in our variable, which was first name. And let's just close out that paren. and the equals. So there we go. Now we've taken that variable that we've created in our code snippet, and now we should be able to, when we preview this again, it should output Kristen just like we had her there before. Okay, so we're starting to build those building blocks to output those names. Okay, so now let's take a look at our data extension and sort of scroll through to see if this is working for all records. So we're going to just go through this data extension. When you have a data extension hooked up, there are 7 different records in here. All you do is go up into this subscriber preview, and you can sort of cycle through all of these different records. So as we're seeing in this data, we see, Kristen does appear here, but for this next record, there's no name populated in here. So we're seeing like something missing in our data set. So this is not the best outcome for somebody. We want to, populate their first name. And so how do we do that? How do we solve that problem where when that name field isn't populated, is there another way we can populate a first name in there? So luckily, we have another data extension, which is this universal file data extension. So you'll see this commonly with those Marketing Cloud environments that are not typically tagged to or tied to Salesforce CRM, where you'll find that there will be a data extension, a universal data extension that will have all of the subscribers and then a wide variety of data points that are available for that subscriber. So in this case, this universal data extension, you can see there's some gaps in some of the data for the first name, but there's also this full name field, which has all of the data available. So what we want to do in our solution is we want to check to see if that first name variable, which we just set, if it's empty, we want to go up and look into this data extension under this full name column and pull in that name as our backup. So to do that, we want to use one of our more advanced functions, a lookup function, and make that happen in our AMPscript. So what we're going to do is go into the AMPscript guide. There's a link in the end of this doc. I'm sure everyone might be familiar with this. This is a fantastic guide. It's a free service where you can just find out all of the functions within AMPscript. You can subscribe. Definitely recommend subscribing and getting the AMPscript guide book. So let's look for the lookup function. And so AMPscript guide is incredibly helpful in what they provide. They do it in these 2 sections. The first section gives you an overview of the function, what it does, and it breaks down all of the different fields in the function. And then it also gives you just a fantastic real life example down here at the bottom. So let's take a look at what lookup is going to do. It's got 4 fields that we need to provide. The first field is the name of the data extension that we want to pull this data from. The second field is the column or the field that we want to return as the variable. So in this example, it would be that full name from the data extension. The third value is the column in the data extension that is going to correspond to the subscriber or the data that we're actually searching for. And then the fourth field is the actual value that's going to be searching for in that column. So we're going to go down into this example, and we're just going to literally copy this code because it's pretty excellent. And we're going to bring this back into our email. And we're going to go back to the content tab, and we're going to go into our block. And let's just paste this in here, and we can start filling this out. So I'm just going to correct this so this is in all caps. Let's change this to, this is going to be, we'll call this full name is what we're returning. All right, so let's start filling out this function. First field was the data extension that we're looking to look up. So here's that data extension, here's that name. So we're just going to copy that, and we're going to paste that in here. Hold on one second. I think I copied the wrong thing. Let me just copy that. And let's paste that into here. Okay, excellent. The second field is the value that we want to return from this data extension, the column. And for that example, it's going to be full name. So again, I'm going to go over to this tab, and we're going to scroll down to this full name variable, and let's just copy that. And then we're going to paste that into our second area there. Okay. The next field is the field in this data extension that identifies the record that we're doing our lookup. So in this example, the universal file is all based on this subscriber key field. So every subscriber has its own unique subscriber key. It's like that golden record identifier in Marketing Cloud. And what we just need to do is confirm in our email send date extension that that subscriber key is the same. So yeah, we've got the subscriber key, and that is what we're going to be using to link into this universal file. So the field that we're looking to make that link is subscriber key in the date extension that we're doing the lookup. So we're going to pass that into here. It's already there, but we'll just paste that over anyways. And then the last field is the actual subscriber key itself. Now, this is going to come from that email send date extension. So because every email send file or field row is going to have its own subscriber key. And there's that field there, subscriber key, that we're going to bring through. So again, we're going to want to, for every single one of these email sends, we're going to want to use this subscriber key to determine that lookup. So what we need to do here in this example, let's just paste in that syntax for subscriber key. Now we need to establish another variable for subscriber key. So let's just copy this syntax. I'm going to paste it in here. Let's call this variable subscriber key. And then we're just going to take that syntax. I'm going to paste in that attribute value, again, using that attribute value to normalize the data. And then our lookup value is going to be that subscriber key. Okay, excellent. So now that we have this variable created, we're going to do a tip, which we had in our 5 tips, which was to help to output this code so we can validate that we're actually seeing that come through. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this variable. And this is just for testing purposes, but just so that we can see that, we're going to duplicate this block. We're going to go in here and we're going to go in the HTML, and let's just say this is going to be, we want to output the full name for each one of these records, just to validate the data. Right. And then we're going to be outputting the full name. And a double, okay, that looks good. All right, so let's preview and test that and just see that we should be, for every one of these records, we should see that full name being outputted. Okay, so we're not seeing that outputted here, and I think that's because I didn't set my variable correctly. So let's go back into our code snippet. And, oh, sorry, let me just delete that. Let's go in here. Okay, so the full name is what we want to output. So we should be able to see that when we preview that. That's the V. So let's just preview that one more time and see what we've got here. Okay, so here's that example where we've got that name field isn't present, but we're seeing it's pulling in Patty Carlson based on that subscriber key. If we try Kristen, so we're seeing Kristen Medina, that's that full name. So it's great. We're seeing that that lookup is now working and we've got that outputted. So now what we want to do is we want to have it outputted here only when that name field is blank. So let's go back into our code snippet. And here's where we're going to want to use our if-then statement. So we're going to do an if empty, another function. If this first name variable is empty, then we want to set. Now, what we're going to want to do is we're going to create a new variable called greeting, which we can use for both of these options. So if that first name is empty, then we're going to want to set our greeting to that lookup value, and then else. If it isn't empty, then let's set the @greeting variable to the first name. And then we're going to do an end if. Okay, so quick overview of if statements. If statements have 3 key variables: the if itself, the then, which is going to be, if this is true, then what does it do? And then the last part is this end if. You always have to end with an end if. In our example, we're using an else here as well, but those are the three, the if, then, and end if. And then we like to indent in our if statements just so you can see what is covered in that if. Okay, so now that we've got that logic in place, let's go back into our email and then let's just change this variable to greeting. And hopefully we should see this now working where it should be showing at least some sort of greeting for all of the different scenarios that are in these data extensions. So here we go. Patty Carlson is now outputting correctly as that dear name. And if we go to Kristen, her first name is still being populated. So now we've got this data looking really good. We're getting some consistency within our data, and it's working for all scenarios. But as you can see, as I'm scrolling through this, we've got some continued inconsistencies with this data. Ideally, we'd like to just always output the first name and not the last name. And then we're also seeing that the data is in a variety of different formatting. This is all caps. Previous one was lowercase. So let's tackle the first part. First part is we want to, if it is a full name, we want to truncate it so it just outputs the first name. So how do we do that? So let's go back into our AMPscript in our content block. And we're going to search for, in our AMPscript guide, we're going to search for this cool little function called substring. Now, substring will return a portion of a specified string of text. It's pretty straightforward. The first value is the string or the variable which you're looking to extract the portion. The second variable is the starting position. For us, it's going to be like the first position because we want the first name. And the last part is the tricky part. This is the length of the actual substring that you're looking at, the actual value you're looking to return. So we don't know. Chris could be 5 letters. Meg could be 3 letters. So that's the one that's going to be kind of custom. If we scroll down to the AMPscript guide, they've got a bunch of different examples here. And this is our exact example. So in this example, we've got a full name, which is Kurt Harris. And this substring code will actually return just the first name. So here it is. Here's that code right here. But we're not going to steal this code. We're not going to copy this code. We're going to build this from scratch so we can really understand it. This goes back to my, my third tip, which is really understand your code. So we're going to take substring. I'm going to see if we can do this on our own. So we're going to go back into here, into our code snippet. Let's paste in this substring value. Okay, so the first value for substring is going to be the greeting itself. That's the full name that we want to extract and pull out just the first name. So easy, 1/3 of it's done. The second value is the starting position. It's going to be first name, so it's position number 1. Fantastic. The last part is the tricky part. How do we know the length of that first name? So that's the part that we need to work through. And this is where we're going to need to add another function to do that. So luckily, there's a function in AMPscript called index of. So let's just search for that index of. Pull this up. What index of does, it returns the position or the number of characters where there's a first occurrence of what you're looking for. So it's pretty straightforward. What you're going to be doing an index of, we're going to be looking at the string or the variable, and it's going to return this value, this point within that string or in that text, the character of when that exists. So in our example, let's copy this code. What we know when the first name ends is there's a space between first name and last name. So we're going to copy this index of syntax. We're going to take this greeting, and that is going to be our first variable. And then we want to return where there is a space. So we're just going to literally add a space in there. And that's going to be the variable. So what we want to do is we're going to want to set add greeting equal to this substring code. Let's just output that now and take a look at what we get. So what we're going to want to do is do this right after we set it in the if statement itself. So let's go in and preview this and see how close we get. Did it output just the first name? So we're going to preview this. And there we go. Look, Chris was Chris Norrie, and then it got reduced to just Chris. We're getting there. It's looking really good. Except we got a space in here now. And that's the one thing it's super close, but we've got this extra space that we want to get rid of. So how do we do that? Just want to get rid of that extra space. So there's a way to do that. So we basically want to say is like, we want this string, this first name to end not at the space, but we want to end it at one space before it, which is the last character of the first name. So let's go into our AMPscript block. And we're going to look for this cool function called subtract. And let's go into subtract. Subtract is very straightforward. Basically, what you're doing is you're taking the first value and you're subtracting the second value from it. So let's copy the syntax. Let's go into our AMPscript block. Now we want to place this correctly. So we're going to be subtracting this variable here. The first variable is this index of greeting variable itself. So that's the first part of that variable. The second part is that we want to subtract just one character. And we want to add a paren in there. Let's see if I did that correctly. Let's preview that. There it is. Patty's now reduced. Let's go check Chris. I think he's further down in the state extension. Yeah, there we go. That space has been reduced. So let's just do a quick summary of what we just did there. So it's like a three function, nested function. We're taking the index of that greeting to find where that blank space is. We're subtracting one character to go back to the end of that. And then we're using substring to use that same logic. So there's a good example of how you could have just literally copied and dropped this into your AMPscript code. But really breaking it down and understanding each one of those, you get to understand three different functions. And then if you ever had a problem or a different use case, you'd be able to know what you're doing there. Okay, so that's that second part where we've been able to reduce down to the first name. The last part is we want an ability to normalize our data from a formatting standpoint. Let's try to get them all initial capped. So when we go into the AMPscript guide, there is a proper case function, which will return will initial cap your variable. So let's just copy this proper case syntax. We're going to go back into our AMPscript. And here we're going to go inline to our greeting here. We're going to go into our HTML editor, and we're just going to copy in that proper case. So let's do that. And let's preview. And hopefully that will work. There we go. Chris is now initial capped. Amanda is no longer all caps. So there we go. We've got our solution. Everything's looking really good from this standpoint. Okay, so this whole exercise was all around a single data point, personalizing the first name. But as you can see, we built some complex functionality within AMPscript and built it up slowly. And the great thing about this code snippet block is that all of your AMPscript is located in one place. It's all organized, it's in order, it's not in several different blocks. So another benefit of using those, a code snippet block. So one thing I want to do here is I want to, I kind of don't like seeing this AMPscript block in my email. So there's a little trick you can do to clean that up. So I'm just going to do outside the AMPscript block. If you use this syntax, it just sort of removes it from the view. It's kind of nice. All right, there we go. All right, so that's our first use case done. Our second use case, if we go back to our deck real quick here, is that we want to add some little bit more advanced functionality to our welcome email. So with every loyalty member, you can take advantage of your loyalty program with all these different steps. So when you join, there might be a step to refer a friend or to make a purchase, whatever. So every loyalty member has different steps. They could have 2 steps, they could have 3 steps, they're all different. And so what we want to do is we want to have this email output all of those custom steps on a subscriber by subscriber basis. So we're going to use advanced lookup rows function for that. We're going to use the concat function to output that entire section of customized. And then if we can have time to it, we're going to go into the if then inline function as well. So we're going to be doing lookup rows. If we have time, we'll do lookup ordered rows. Going through that function. And then we're also going to be breaking down for loops, which is going to be in the lookup rows functionality, all the different specific characteristics of a for loop, and then wrap it up with our concat function as well. So let's go back into our email. And thank you. Yes, I'd like to continue working. So what I want to do is I want to add to this block, I just want to add a quick sentence in here that talks about these loyalty steps. So I'm just going to add a BR in here. Let's add one more. And let's say to take advantage of your loyalty program, please follow these steps. Colon, and let's just do a BR. Fantastic. Okay, so now below this is where we're going to want to render this custom content of all of those steps that correspond to each subscriber. Okay, now to find those steps, we've got another data extension that has been created by our IT team, and it's a database of all of these steps. So it's a laundry list of all the steps. They're not able to attribute those to each row of subscribers in that universal file because there are multiple steps. So they've got this database of all of the steps, and they correspond to each subscriber. So there's a variety of different subscribers in here. There might be a subscriber might have 2 rows in here. One other one might have 5. They're all identified by that subscriber key. And then we've got a couple of different fields we want to output. We want to output the step itself. And then we want to output this bonus month that if they accomplish this step by this month, they'll get extra bonus points. So what we want to do is we want to do a lookup to this data extension based on that subscriber key that we're emailing. And we want to output not only 2 different fields, but we also want to pull in every single row that's associated with that subscriber key. So that's where we're going to want to do a slight variation on lookups to lookup rows. Lookups is fantastic if you're looking to return a single value on a single row. But if you have multiple values and multiple rows, lookup rows is your tool there. It's a little bit simpler syntax-wise. It's very similar to lookup, where the first field is the name of the data extension. And the third and the fourth field of lookup is the same for lookup rows. It's the name of the column that identifies the row, and it's identifying that third is the value that's identifying that specific subscriber. So if we scroll down here, AMPscript Guide has a fantastic use case example that we're going to copy. So we're going to go down and just copy this entire example all the way down to here. We're going to bring that into our code snippet. So we're going to scroll back up into our code snippet, and let's create a little bit of space here. We're going to paste that in. Okay, perfect. So let's start off with our first, the function, the lookup rows. So the first field we want to populate is the name of the data extension. So we're going to go into that data extension. We're going to copy this welcome steps name. We're going to paste that in here. The next field that we want to identify is the field in this data extension, which identifies which, in our case, is that subscriber key. So in this one, it's the actual customer. We can see that subscriber syntax that we're familiar with. So we're going to copy this customer column, and that is going to be our second field. And then the field that we're looking up is the subscriber key. So luckily, we've already set that value, this variable up here. So let's just copy this down here, and we're going to paste it in here. All right, so we've got the lookup rows function filled out. That's the easy part. Now we're going to go into the for loop that accompanies this lookup rows function. So I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup here. This is not needed for our code. And then I'm going to also clean up a little bit down here. This is not needed for this use case as well. This was an inline example, but it's not what we're looking for. We're going to take a little bit and we're going to go through what I've got here just in a second. Let me just clean this up and move this up a little bit. Okay. So the value that lookup rows gets set to is this @rows. Now, what gets returned from a lookups function is this value that doesn't really have something that you can use within our function. So this is where we're going to use our first value, our first function within AMPscript, which is row count. What row count does is that it takes this value that gets returned from your lookups call, and it converts it into a number that is helpful, like a number of 4. It says, there are 4 records in here that I want to cycle through in my for loop. So that's what row count does. Next up is our if statement. We're very familiar with that. So we want to say if that count is greater than 0, if there are more than 0 rows found in this data extension, then go through and do the for loop. All right, now we're going to get into the for loop itself. Now the for loop starts with a for loop, and it ends with a next. So in that for loop, you're going to want to create this variable, this @I variable, which is going to be your counter. And so we want this variable to go through 1, start at the number of 1, the first row, and you want it to go through every single that row, all the way through the row count to do that. And what you're going to be doing are these variables here that are going to be in your for loop. So I'm going to delete these variables for right now. The next variable that we are going to be using is this row variable. So what this row variable does, it sets and identifies the specific row that you are in your row in your for loop. So if it's you're in the for loop count number 2, that's the row it's going to determine to pull in. And then the last value in a for loop is the field. So this field is going to return, based on that row, the field that's associated with the column in that data extension. So to fill that out, let's need our first field that we want to return is step. So in the data extension, there's that step field that we want to bring in. So we're going to copy that syntax. We're going to paste that in here. And then the next field that we want to bring in is this bonus month. And then we're going to go back to our data extension in here, and we're going to copy in bonus month. And we're going to paste that in there as well. Okay, that's it for as far as the for loop. What we'll want to also do is to declare both of these variables in our for loop so that each time it goes through the loop, those values get nulled out before they get set again. Okay, so basically what this is going to do is going to say if I find 3 rows associated with a subscriber, I'm going to go through this exercise and set these variables 3 times. So the last part that we need to do is we need to create a variable that is going to collect all of those fields each time it goes through that for loop. So what we're going to want to do is let's call this our loyalty output variable. Now we're going to use this concat function, which is basically just going to concatenate these steps and these bonus months each time it goes through the for loop. So whenever you're doing this, you want to start out your concat with the variable itself because it wants to build on itself. And then within the concat, you can add a combination of text, HTML, and variables to fill out each one of those rows that you're going to create. So in our example, let's say we want to put in loyalty step. Let's make that a colon and a space. And then we want to output the step itself after that text. And then let's put in another variable, which we'll just use a comma. And let's say bonus month, colon, space. And then we're going to put in our bonus month variable to output that right after that little piece of text. And then last but not least, because we want to have each one of these output as single rows in the output, we're going to also want to include some HTML, a return as well. Okay, so each time it's going to create a new row of data that we can output in that for loop. The last part that we didn't cover was this end if. That is the end if that wraps up this if statement here. Okay, so now with this set, let's go back into our content block. And we're going to simply just output this variable, and hopefully, fingers crossed, it's going to output all of that data that comes from all of those for loops. So all we're going to do is a percent equals v. We're going to paste in that variable, and we're going to do an equals percent as well. So let's just preview that real quick and see if that worked.
Tim, quick time check. We've got 4 minutes to go.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate that. We are getting very close. So here we go. Here's that output. For Kristen. Kristen has 3 different loyalty steps: refer a friend, sign up for a loyalty program, refer a friend as well. The 3 different types of months as well. If we take a look at Chris has only 2 different two different loyalty steps. We probably need something of that bold return there to return that. But now we're seeing how these variables can be outputted and customized based on that lookup there. Let me just quickly go in here, and one other thing I wanted to output is I wanted to output this row count as well, so that we can see the row count and validate that each row count has its own number. So let's preview that again. And this should hopefully output the row count so that you can validate that it's cycling through. So example, Chris has 2 rows, and you can see he's got 2 rows of data. His one's not, he's coming through. Kristen has 4 as well. So anyways, sorry, I'm going to wrap up pretty quickly. There's an example of how you can use the concat statement to output all this custom variables and create any sort of content that you want in AMPscript itself. And that's using that lookup rows and also for loops. So let me just hop right back into our slides, and we'll do a quick wrap up because we're running out of time. And okay, so those are those tips. Hopefully that was helpful. I wanted to quickly cover some of these resources. Again, we can share this deck. There are a lot of resources, a lot of which we covered today. The AMPscript guide. There's the Phoenix SFMC group. Definitely highly recommend. They have a lot of hands-on sessions where you can learn AMPscript. They have an AMPscript bootcamp. There's some great videos there. And there's also this great tool called AMPscript 30, where you can do 30 days worth of AMPscript building and exploring those different functions. So that's it. Just wanted to wrap that up and say thank you and open up for any questions. Anybody have any questions on what we covered today? All right, well, just because I'm a little nerdy, I want to figure out why that is not returning. So I want to go into this. I think I just need an extra return, bold return there. And I think that would come out a little bit nicer. And then one thing else I want to do is I want to add a bold to this text just so that it comes out a little bit nicer as well. So I'm going to add a bold tag there. And then I'm going to add another bold tag at the end to not have that be bold. Let's see if that hopefully should have a little bit better of a preview of that content. There we go. So it's coming out. It's got the loyalty step bolded. There's that full list. It was sort of needed a bold return or a break return there. So any questions? I know we only got a minute left. Any questions on the AMPscript that we've learned today?
Does Lookup Pros allow you to filter records from the data extension, or do you have to use a loop for that?
Great question. Yes, so you can filter in lookup rows. So if what you could do is say your bonus month, you wouldn't want to do any bonus months for December. You could do an if statement after that is set and say, if bonus month equals December, then do.
Top marks. All right. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Hopefully we'll see you at Connections.
Yeah, hopefully. Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.